This is a video to explain how clear boards work and a little bit about how we operate them on the hive. We have got a mock-up here because it's easier to explain here than it is at the hive. Traditionally, beekeepers would have done what's smoke and shake, which is to smoke the supers, take the frames out and then shake the bees off. Chemicals have been used as well, but clearer boards are probably the easiest for all beekeepers. So I'm going to explain how I do it or how I've done it. And I work on single brood chamber. Double brood chamber's fine, there's no problem with that. And what we've got to do is clear the bees out of the supers back into the brood chamber. Now remember that the queen is down below the queen excluder. And what's really happening with the clearer board is that the bees at the top become divorced from the queen at the bottom, and they then try and rejoin her. Now, there are two reasons why clearer boards don't always work as perhaps they should do. One is if you have brood above the queen excluder. Obviously, the brood pheromone tends to hold the bees. And the other one is if you're queenless at the bottom. Yes, clearer boards do work, but not as well as if you've got a queen-right colony. All a clearer board is effectively a barrier with a one-way mechanism so that bees in the supers can move down into the brood chamber and not be able to get back again. Here is a board that's called either clearer board or crown board. It's really dual purpose. And the reason for the slots is to take what's called a porter bee escape, which was patented in the back end of the 19th century. All it is a little device with some springs in, very fine springs, where the bees, through the springs open out and close behind them, and it's impossible for the bees to get back. Quite frankly, I find these a little bit of a nuisance because all sorts of things happen. If you get drones in the supers, they very often block these up, and also bees can propolyze them. They're also probably the slowest method of clearing supers that I know of. A little bit of history, there was a slight variation on that called a crowther bee escape. And this one here is certainly well over 50 years old because they've never been made in my time in beekeeping, which is 57 years. And it's a similar principle with springs as well. And that is obviously much more difficult to make than the porter bee escape was. So that's presumably why they weren't very popular. What is easiest for beekeepers is a mechanism that has got no moving parts. You can buy these 8-way escapes, or these that are called Rhombus. There are several others as well, and effectively what you do is you just fix that onto a board with a hole in, either like that or like that. Can be done with just drawing pins or perhaps duct tape, as I've seen people use, although it really needs to be quite firm. And all that happens is the bees come through the hole in the board, congregate in this area here. In human terms, the bees in the supers are saying we've lost our mum because of course the pheromones aren't getting through. The bees underneath are saying, well, we got her down here. So the bees congregate in this area and then walk down these slots out of those little channels and back into the brood chamber. If they want to get back, they tend to get back through here rather than go down through the channels. You've got exactly the same principle with the rhombus escape. The bees at the top congregate here. Bees at the bottom who've got the queen congregate here, and the bees just walk down through these channels. Now, in my experience, both of these are equally as efficient. They both work really well, and you can clear a super quite quickly. What you need to do is not just use an ordinary clearer board, and the reason for that is that the bees actually get moved quite quickly, and they congregate underneath here, and you can get quite a lot of bees, and they're packed. They can be temporary because they can be put onto just a clearer board. If you've got two holes in your clearer board, just block one up somehow. There are other designs, and this one here is my design, which is a modified version of the triangular bee escape. And this is actually more complicated than it need be. But what we've got is a piece of mesh kept apart by thin strips of wood with holes in the corners, which are the equivalent of the holes in these other escapes. So you get a channel going through there. These side bits could easily be made out of frame sidebars. So there really isn't very much cost to it. You know, perhaps frames that are broken, and you know, it's nice and easy. Now there are several other variations of this, and they all work quite well. What I did when I designed this was that I tried to get two channels going into one so the bees wouldn't return. In fact, what's on the inside isn't needed at all. I've found that out since. The design of this, the drawings of this, are on Dave Cushman's website, together with quite a lot of others. A feature of this is the mesh is a quarter of the mesh that's used for a national open mesh floor, which works quite neatly. Some people have used much smaller bits. Others have used plastic Netlon. Now, bear in mind that a clearer board is something you'll probably only use two or 3 days a year. It's really improvisation more than perhaps making a specialist piece of equipment. So the bees, exactly the same as principle as these. The bees come down through the hole, congregate in this area, and then just come out of the gaps. And I find these work really well. In fact, so well that I've got a 50mm or 2-inch deep rim round here, and when it's put on that way, and a strong collar, these actually fill up with bees, and they fill up so full that a beekeeping friend of mine, Peter Jenkins in Wales, has come up with the idea of shaking these bees into a nuke box from 2 or 3 colonies, adding a few frames of brood to them, and he's effectively got some late increase. Because those bees really aren't much good. They've done all the foraging they're going to, and he's made up new colonies at actually no cost. So that's a simple idea. I'm pretty certain it's going to work, but these are all the sort of things you could do as a beekeeper. Now there is another one that I've just been given. It's just a piece of Corex, and the beekeeper has cut the hole in there, cut a rhombus escape in half, stapled it to the Corex with just a batten around the edge. Now that is going to be absolutely adequate for the ordinary beekeeper. There's virtually no cost to it, and it's a nice, easy way of doing it. Certainly, much better than these things. To come to use the clearer board, obviously smoke the colony as you would normally. Remove the supers above the queen excluder. I suggest you remove the queen excluder, but you don't actually have to. It's going to make it quite a bit easier for you, and you don't need it anymore anyway. So remove the queen excluder, then put on the clearer board the right way up. Don't put it on upside down. I have had a few emails over the years, which way do I put on a clearer board? Then put the supers back, and with my type of clearer board, I have had them do almost 100% clear in 4 hours. I would suggest leaving it longer if you can. The bigger the colony, the more bees to get down through, the longer it's going to take. But on the other hand, the quicker you can get the honey off, it'll still retain warmth and it'll extract easier. Some people put them on at night and then take the supers off in the morning. That's fine. You'll get rid of most of the bees anyway. Now you need to be careful, because what you've got is some honey which is unguarded. So at the time you're taking honey off, there's probably going to be a nectar dearth. So you've got robbing not only by bees, but certainly end of the season by wasps as well. Wasps will find a gap anywhere, and they can get through a smaller gap than bees can. So you must make sure there's absolutely no gaps anywhere. If there is, then just take a piece of propolis, a little bit of propolis, and fill up the gap. And be careful, because unguarded, you can lose a couple of supers of honey fairly quickly. Also, the people who don't block off the holes in the crown board, bees can get up through the roof, probably through the ventilation holes, and that's unguarded as well. But I always keep those covered anyway, because there's no advantage in keeping them uncovered during the summer. So that's really the basis of clearer boards and how to use them. Now, with this type of board, it's mine, and that's the one that I've got these days most experience of. If you take the supers off, obviously get those into your honey house as quick as you can. So they're now out of the way. All you need to do is take it off, turn it upside down, and just leave it on the front of the hive for the bees to walk up into the hive, and they'll walk up. And by the time you've extracted your honey, these should be clear. You just pack them up and into the shed. One thing I haven't said is that these sort of boards and mechanisms are only used occasionally. They can get blocked up with spiders, webs, and all sorts of things like that. So make sure that that the holes are clear. All you got to do is just poke something in, like a little stick or twig or something like that, and you'll be okay. If you do still use these porta bee escapes, it's probably best just to take them apart, check that everything is okay, they're nice and clean. The springs are close enough so that the bees can't return, because if they return, of course it's almost like a normal situation, and you'll find that the bees will still be in the supers. So when you've cleared your supers, ground ball back on, go and do your extracting. Now you need to think about clearing the supers. Some of the old books and some of the old advice was to store supers wet, which means straight from extraction, not cleaned up by the bees. And the reason that was done was to avoid damage from wax moth. That's not really a problem. or certainly not if you keep a brood out of your supers anyway. I find it easier to get the bees to clear the honey out of the supers, because then it's not messy during the winter. The honey doesn't ferment and cause you some problems. So I tend to clean the supers up, which you can do almost straight away. And the old style crown boards used to have a hole here and a sliding. And the reason for that is that you could put the crown board back, or the clearer board back, open up the slide, open up the hole, and the bees will then just come up and clean the supers. But there's a simpler way than that, um, which, if you've got an animal, all you need is a tough animal food bag and cut a hole in it. You can just about get your thumb through. Now, if you put that over the brood chamber, then your supers on top, make sure again the bees can't get in. You need to do this in the evening, probably when it's dusk, which is probably when you finish your extracting anyway. So what happens is you've got a barrier between the bees that are now in the box and the food up here. And I don't know if it's that the bees think they can't defend it or not, but with the small hole, the bees will come up, clean the honey out, and take it down into the brood chamber. If you didn't put this barrier in, what I find is they will store it in the bottom super, and then you've got a choice of extracting it or leaving it, or doing whatever. So I find that a really useful way and simple way and cheap way of doing it.